Okay, well, welcome members and happy Members Month. We want to thank you all for joining us in person today, and also thank you to the many folks joining us online. Today we are honored to be joined by Rebekah Kim, the Academy's head librarian, to hear about the history of science, the legacy of colonialism and racism at the Academy, and how we can harness the learnings from our past to forge a more equitable future of science. Rebecca's talk will conclude with a Q&A, and there'll be plenty of time at the end. So we are going to ask that folks in person keep your questions till the end, so we can hand off a mic and our online audience can hear those wonderful questions. Well, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rebekah Kim.
Thank you, Jess, for that nice introduction. Thank you, everyone that's here and online. Anyways, so I am going to talk today about the colonial history of the Academy. Sorry. Oh, no, we lost our. I guess that is something that always happens. You practice, and then when you're actually trying to do it, do I need to move the window over? Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. Yes, thank you for bearing with the technical snafu. We shall begin. Thank you, everyone, for coming here and online. I'm Rebekah Kim, the head librarian, and I'm here to talk about the colonial history of the Academy. Before I start, I just want to say that I'm not an expert on racism, colonialism, or even the Academy history. I am here today because I spent the last few years reflecting and re-examining the Academy's history and seeing the legacies of racism and colonialism. So this talk is just sharing what I've learned so far in my journey. I really see this as a beginning of a conversation, and I hope that this is an opportunity to be able to talk more openly about these legacies. I'm packing in a lot of information, so just like Jess said, if people can hold their questions to the end or type them in the chat if you're online, that would be very much appreciated. This talk was originally presented internally to Academy staff in April of this past year. The original presenters aren't all here today, but I wanted to introduce them here because they helped create and develop this talk, and without them, I wouldn't have been able to put this together. So the first up is Christine Garcia, who's the collection manager of geology, Flavia Esteves, postdoctoral fellow in entomology, Kate Montana, a former library research assistant and currently a graduate student in the Esposito lab, and Lindsay Palama, who's the research collections registrar. I want to state that science is not neutral or apolitical. Though the scientific method is impartial, the scientific enterprise is subject to individual biases and societal values. Racism justified by science has had an immense and devastating impact on our world. Scientific racism has justified slavery, colonialism, genocide, population control, anti-immigration policies, crime control policies, and so much more. The more I sit with our history and the history of science, it becomes very clear that context matters. I want to talk a little bit about how I got started on this journey. In the library, we've been working on projects to elevate stories of hidden historical figures. Oftentimes, they're from underrepresented communities. And in all our digging and research, we realized there weren't that many people from these communities, and it made me wonder why. The chart on the left may help explain or help us understand why that is so. and asks the question, does racism shape who is a scientist? This chart on the left is a demographic makeup of previous Academy curators. In our history, we've only had 3 curators of color out of a total of 144 curators in total, and our first curator of color was hired in 1972. The chart on the right is the demographic for the current group of curators. It doesn't reflect our local community, San Francisco, or even California, but it is pretty representative of the larger STEM field. And so in asking this question, does racism shape who is a scientist? We'll be looking at the racism and the history of science. I am going to give a little content warning. We will be talking about specific examples of colonialism and racism at the Academy and the history of science, which may be difficult for people to hear and see. What is race? Joseph Graves and Alan Goodman from their book Racism Not Race has a great definition. Race is a worldview and social classification that divides humans into groups based on their appearance and assumed ancestry, and that has been used to establish social hierarchies. Race is a social construct, but scientists have made race real through their pseudoscientific studies purporting to show that race is biological. And race wasn't just a tool to measure human differences, but also used to measure human progress. The image on the right is the front piece is an illustration comparing heads of human races and apes in the book Natural History of Creation by Ernest Haenkel that was printed in 1868. And he is a German zoologist who's now more known for his scientific illustrations. In talking about the history of science, I'm going to start with Carl Linnaeus. He first published his work Systema Naturae, System of Nature, in 1735. This work provided a classification of the then 3 kingdoms of nature: mineral, vegetable, and animal. His work established a system of naming organisms, which is the binomial system, which we use to this day. He was the first naturalist to classify humans within the animal kingdom. Linnaeus inserted humans into the class called quadrupeds and the order Anthropomorpha. For the first 9 editions, Linnaeus's classifications of humans remained stable, with human species divided into 4 types or varieties. In 1758, in the 10th edition, there were moral values added to the 4 species. So this is a chart, and I'm just going to read through 2 of the descriptions. For the species Europus, skin color, medical temperament, and body posture was white, sanguine, muscular. Physical traits were plenty of yellow hair, blue eyes. Behavior was light, wise, inventor, and the manner of clothing was protected by tight clothing. The form of government was governed by rights. For the species Asiaticus, which is the category I would belong to, skin color, medical temperament, and body posture is sallow, melancholic, stiff. Physical traits are blackish hair, dark eyes, and the behavior is stern, haughty, greedy. Manner of clothing is protected by loose clothing or loose garments, and form of government is governed by opinions. This classification system becomes the basis for scientific racism and establishes race firmly as a biological construct. So I'm going to move to a pivotal moment in scientific history, which is 1859. Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species, which is considered to be the foundation of evolutionary biology. This work popularized the theory of natural selection. Natural selection also had larger impacts and inspired the pseudoscience of eugenics, which believes that you can basically breed a better human. The term eugenics was coined by Francis Galton in 1883. And you may be asking, who is Francis Galton? Well, he was born in 1822 and was a statistician, sociologist, tropical explorer, and so much more. He was also a proponent of social Darwinism, eugenics, and scientific racism. He was prolific, and his influences were broad. He came up with the first weather map, he pioneered fingerprinting for crime detection, and was hugely influential in the field of statistics. He truly believed that human race could be improved if only the most intelligent were encouraged to reproduce. And these idea of who is best is closely tied to race. He died before he could see the impacts of eugenics, but here in the United States, eugenics was used to justify involuntary sterilization of tens of thousands of people considered feeble-minded and fueled racist immigration policies. And in Europe, eugenics helped set the scene for the Holocaust. I think the strangest thing about Galton is that his story isn't well known, and his legacy of racism and eugenics are obscured. There's a great TED Talk or TEDx talk by Subhadra Das, who talks about how she only learned about Galton and his racist legacy after becoming the curator overseeing his collection. I ask, why did it take that long for this story to be told? And now I'm going to talk about a more contemporary figure, E.O. Wilson. He was an American biologist who specialized in the study of ants. He was also a prolific and esteemed writer, having won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, and later in his life, a vocal conservationist. He started the Half Earth Project, in which he argued that the only way to avoid a mass extinction would be to leave half the Earth wild. He has been called a modern-day Darwin, and he was not only an esteemed academic, but also beloved by many. This photo of him here on the slide was when he came to visit the Academy in 2015 and was treated like a celebrity. On the academic side of things, he's considered the father of sociobiology, a field of biology that aims to examine and explain social behavior in terms of evolution. Very basically, sociobiology proposed that certain behavior traits are inherited and those traits have been refined by natural selection. For example, traits like aggressiveness can be explained by biology rather than it being explained by social environment. There was swift criticism about applying this concept to humans, which petered out over the course of his career. Shortly after Wilson died in December 2021, an article came out in Scientific America called The Complicated Legacy of E.O. Wilson that was a reflection of complicated legacies of scientists whose works are based on racist ideas. The author called for a racial reckoning in science and highlighted the needs to diversify the scientific workforce. There was an uproar about tarnishing E.O. Wilson's legacy, and many scientists asked for the journal to retract the article. But in the aftermath, a few other scientists and historians started to dig into Wilson's archive. And I'm just going to say personally, I love it when an archives can come through in this way. And in their research, they discovered he had a close relationship with Jean-Philippe Rushton. Rushton was a psychology professor at Western University in Canada who focused on connecting race and intelligence. Later on in his life, he was the head of the Pioneer Fund, a white nationalist group that still exists to this day. His work was overtly racist. His major published work, Race, Evolution, and Behavior, found that Black people have larger genitals, breasts, and buttocks, characteristics that Rushton alleges has an inverse relationship to brain size and thus intelligence. He and Wilson may have seemed like an odd pair, but they had an aligned worldview. In his letters, Wilson again and again supported and encouraged Rushton. Wilson truly believed that his theories of sociobiology could be applied to humans just as Rushton was proposing. People are just starting to reckon with Wilson's legacy and what his support for a white supremacist means. The E.O. Wilson Biodiversity Foundation has made a statement acknowledging Wilson and Rushton's relationship and acknowledging the harmful effects of systematic racism. I'd like to take a moment to reflect on this quote from Dr. C. Brandon Agbuno, who's the assistant professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at Yale University. The cheap way out is to blame individuals rather than reflect on the ecology that created, supported, and amplified those behaviors. It's easy to focus and vilify single individuals, but I want us to zoom out a bit and see that they were not alone in these ideas. If anything, they were supported by the larger scientific community, and silence acted like a tacit approval. It's easy to hide behind the untruth that science is objective and impartial and fail to recognize bias. I want to leave with a question: who is benefiting from this silence and whitewashing of history where science, racism, and colonial powers are interconnected? I'm going to start this part of our presentation with another quote. This quote is from Nairi Blankenberg, who's the director of the National Museum of African Art. Museums are Eurocentric institutions created in Europe on the basis of Enlightenment ideas that manifest in quite a racist way to the rest of the world. Their DNA is problematic, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't exist. So we're now going to focus on the Academy's history, collections, and legacies that we continue to deal with. Museums are not neutral spaces, and there are many colonialisms that are shaped by the places they are from and the people resisting and benefiting from it. The aspects of colonial legacies that we are talking about here today are the imbalances in the dynamics of power and the exploitation of resources in the name of science. We're only just starting to understand the way the Academy has perpetuated colonial practices, and we want to share some of the things we've learned. Our museum was built and currently stands on the lands of the Ramaytush, Ohlone, and Muwekma people. We would be remiss to discuss the colonial history of the Academy without acknowledging the Academy's ongoing impact on the indigenous peoples that lived and continue to live on the land we occupy. We perpetuate colonial practices by merely occupying this land, in addition to the colonial practices that we will talk about today. The California Academy of Sciences was founded in 1853. The founders saw that we have on this coast, this is a quote, sorry, we have on this coast a virgin soil with new characteristics and attributes which have not been justified to a critical scientific examination. Subjected to a critical scientific examination. Foundations of the Academy was driven by a desire to understand natural history of the region, but also about uncovering the availability of economic resources and resources that would support human populations on the land, like water resources and agricultural capacity. The idea of virgin soil, which encompasses the pioneering spirit, fails to acknowledge the Ramaytush, Ohlone, and Muwekma people who have lived on these lands. It also fails to recognize that they had been carefully managing and tending these lands for millennia and were systematically removed and murdered by the state and federal government to make room for new settlers. Our founding is firmly rooted in a settler colonialist mindset, and the Oxford language defines settler colonialism as a type of colonialism in which the indigenous peoples of a colonized region are displaced by settlers who permanently form a society there. I'm now going to talk about David Starr Jordan, who was an influential early member of the Academy that we don't talk much about. He is just one person we've done research on with an anti-colonial, anti-racist lens so far, and he is very much a product of his time. He is mostly well known for being the founding president of Stanford University from 1891 to 1913. He was also the president of the Academy intermittently from 1896 to 1912, as well as the Academy curator of ichthyology from 1892 to 1896. And there are at least 1,900 type specimens in our ichthyology collections that were collected by Jordan himself. He is more recently known for actively promoting the concept of eugenics. He believed in the sterilization of unfit people and was a pacifist because he believed war promoted reverse selection, where the fittest individuals died early. He taught a class at Stanford on eugenics every year, gave public speeches about it, and which he even gave here at the Academy, and he held several roles in various eugenics groups. He was involved in the American Breeders Association, First International Eugenics Congress, and the Human Betterment Foundation. And the Human Betterment Foundation was a group that influenced Nazi sterilizations and eugenics research. I want to point out, just like I did before, that the idea of eugenics was widely accepted by the scientific community at the time, and Jordan's views would have been seen as the norm. We here at the Academy, we like to think of Jordan as having a very narrow influence, but actually his influences were fairly large and lasting. This slide is comprised of his students and mentees. 7 of them who have had roles at the Academy and were personally chosen by Jordan. Carl and Rosa Smith Eigenman, who are ichthyologists here at the Academy, Indiana, and San Diego. Rosa Eigenman is considered the first woman ichthyologist in the United States. Carl was a professor of zoology and later a dean at the Indiana University. He authored or co-authored over 200 publications, including 25 with his wife, Rosa. Barton Warren Everman was the executive director of the Academy for almost 20 years, from 1914 to 1932. He oversaw the construction of the Academy in Golden Gate Park after it had been destroyed by the 1906 earthquake and fire, and the creation of the Steinhardt Aquarium. Eric Knight Jordan, who is David Starr Jordan's son, was the Academy geology curator from 1924 to 1926. Charles Henry Gilbert was an Academy ichthyology curator from 1892 to 1898 and was a founding professor in the zoology department at Stanford from 1891 to 1925. Frank McFarland studied mollusks and was an authority of nudibranchs. He was the director of the Hopkins Marine Station intermittently from 1910 to 1917 and the Academy director from 1934 to 1938 after Everman's passing. Paul Popenoe was an influential advocate of compulsory sterilization of mentally ill people. He was the editor of the Journal of Heredity and worked with the Human Betterment Foundation. Alvin Seal was an ichthyologist and the very first superintendent of the Steinhardt Aquarium from 1921 to 1941. And Leo Stanley was the chief surgeon of San Quentin State Prison from 1913 to 1951. He was most notable for performing unethical human experiments and forced sterilizations, which were illegal at the time, on inmates during his tenure. Listing all these people is just to illustrate Jordan's significant influence at the Academy and in the world of eugenics, and that his story is very much part of our history. This map here illustrates the geographic scope of collecting at the Academy. It's an incomplete view, only a fraction of our total collections are represented here, but it's a good illustration showing where our collections are from. The larger and deeper the colored dot, the greater the number of specimens obtained. And you can see the Academy's concentration on the west coast of North America, as well as a larger proportion of specimens coming from the global south. Although many of our more recent collections were made through collaborations with host countries, historically most were not. Historical expeditions in particular before there were rules and regulations regarding collections, were colonial in nature. Partnerships with local communities were either non-existent or paternalistic. We did not always seek permission to remove materials, and there were very few limitations on what and how much you could collect. This is very much the case for 19th century explorers who took advantage of colonialism and imperialism and set off to colonies abroad on voyages of exploration and conquest. And here we have some early photos of early expeditions from the Academy. And the Academy didn't always have to go very far to go on faraway expeditions to build their collections. We've also extracted resources locally, often within the state of California. This is the first map of the mineral districts of California that was created by John B. Trask. Trask was one of the Academy founders and was a physician by training and a geologist. Much of the work he generated this map was paid for by the newly formed California Senate. His work ultimately amounted in resource exploitation and was thought and considered to be prospecting on behalf of the government. There are also accounts of collecting during this time that are ripe with stories of evading the hostile natives. I want to share a quote from William Dahl about William Gabb regarding a fossil expedition to Fort Tejon. The Indians on the way had risen in revolt, so the party turned eastward, again into the Sierra, working easterly and northerly until the Kern River was reached at Kernville, the Indians being hostile for the whole distance. So I'm gonna now talk about more modern collecting and the issue of parachute science. What is parachute science? It's when scientists with access to funding drop in on a resource-deprived community to take whatever is needed to further their research without any further effective communication and engagement with others from the host community. Parachuters are our present-day colonial explorers. Drop-in zones are fieldwork sites in economically derived communities, not always located abroad, but often in the global South. The goal of the parachuter is to collect whatever is needed for their research. The key difference between a parachuter and a regular field biologist is that a parachuter does not credit the local knowledge and expertise that supported their work. And this also highlights another issue, that science is not an individual endeavor. There are no heroes here. Just like in the past, these efforts are often done with the help of a larger group of people. Today, parachute science perpetuates inequality by maintaining the scientific power imbalances of colonial times and maintains a system of exclusion that deprives many human societies of their own biodiversity data and knowledge. And now I'm going to talk about more specific examples from our museum collections, or from museum collections. Legacies of colonial and racism are embedded throughout our collections here. We often think of ourselves as too young to be guilty of colonialism in our museum, collections, but we do have examples of European and American colonial legacies in our collections. One example is on the left. It's a specimen of a pipefish collected from San Miguel Harbor, Philippines in 1908 by the U.S. Fish Commission, which is present-day U.S. Fish and Wildlife, during the period of American colonization of the Philippines. The specimen represented is the paratype, or one of the individuals from which the entire species is described. The image on the top right is one of our marketing photos, and notice the color-coded dots on the top right of each specimen label. The colored dots represent zoogeographical regions. The choice of colors parallel the color-coded maps assigned to regions of so-called human racial categories defined by Linnaeus, with red representing North America, yellow large regions of Asia under the designation Oriental, black for Africa, and etc. This system is no longer used in our entomology collection. However, the system was physically applied to hundreds of thousands of specimen trays in the collection. And some other examples that are harmful in content, we have collection labels that contain old colonial place names. We have specimens that have racist, scientific, and common names. We have specimens of species named after problematic people. The image on the right is a type of cave beetle named after Adolf Hitler. In our collections, we have to ask what else is missing, like who gets credit and who does not. Often those who are credited are Western scientists. And what do we still not know? And what do we have yet to uncover? Which leads me to the next slide, which is there's about barriers to access the Academy collection data. A fraction of our collection data is readily available online. Out of about 46 million specimens, only about 22% have been databased. This does not include digital imaging. The image of the text on the slide is an example of how some collection data is documented, handwritten in a ledger. The vast majority of collections that have been digitized and made available are due to external funding, primarily the National Science Foundation, and are directly tied to thematic objectives research questions. This creates the potential to introduce bias into what is digitized and for who. Without digital access, the only means to which to access the collections or collection information is through an in-person visit to the collections, and even then, access is typically relegated to qualified individuals. Collections may be made available upon request, but this also requires prior knowledge of the existence of collections. Since so much isn't even database, it's hard for someone to even know what to ask for. Problematic science doesn't just occur in scientific publications or labs. Since museums transitioned from a cabinet of curiosities to deliberately organized public forums, exhibitions have been used to delight and educate visitors. Exhibits are an extension of the subject studied, whether that be art or history, and in our case, showcasing the process of scientific thought. We use research collections as a means to display and advance scientific theories. Historically, we have exhibited materials collected from colonial entities and an erasure of non-white presence, narrative, and perspectives. For example, we've used terms like discovered and uncivilized, and we know that words matter, they carry consequence and reflect the values and beliefs. These are images of early academy displays from our Market Street location from 1891 to 1906. Displays contained real skeletal remains and casts of both animals and humans. We've even had a display of, and this is a quote, study of the heads of all races, where the finely developed head of the American is contrasted with that of the Australian bushman. These kinds of exhibits were common at the time. It was to illustrate the concept of phrenology or craniology, which is the study of the shape and size of the cranium as a supposed indication of character and mental abilities. Phrenology was used to perpetrate eugenics and the idea that race is biological. By claiming that science is objective and not cultural, gave scientists at the time the ability to separate the impact. The fact is, the science of the 1850s reflects the societal values of the scientists at that time. All these displays were destroyed by the 1906 earthquake and fire. In our more recent past, the Academy had the Wattis Hall of Man from 1973 to 1993. Taken from a description when it was open, the Hall of Man holds dioramas of pre-technological people in their native environments, cultural scenes from the Pacific Islands, Japan and Andes, and the Ethiopian desert, and Australia are represented, along with the American Indian cultures of Northern California, Alaska, and the Southwest. The method of display was a way of objectifying people and defining them as other, or as inherently different and separate from Western civilization. And displaying the classifying ethnographic collections as natural history, same as pinned insects or jarred fish, further devalued their humanity. The othering of non-Western civilizations have an influence beyond just a display. It's fundamental to colonial ambition. Wattis Hall of Man became the Wattis Exhibit Hall in 1993. So what are we doing now? Number one, we're acknowledging our history and we are continuing to examine and think critically about ourselves. We are also trying to address parachute science and develop true non-paternalistic partnerships and share results in open access journals. There is a focus on democratizing collection data through targeted digitization efforts, and to do so for the benefit of host communities in a timely manner. We want to address racism and colonialism in our collections, decolonize scientific names, provide proper attribution, acknowledge harmful content, and allocate resources to correct remnants of racist and colonial legacies. We have an Indigenous solidarity group that is working on strengthening pre-existing and cultivating new practices of relationship building with Indigenous partners, colleagues, and collaborators. And a project spearheaded by the library and a product of from the talk that we had given earlier this year. This past summer, there was an Institute for Biodiversity, Science, and Sustainability, which is called IBSS, our research department. There was a seminar series to learn more about the history of scientific racism, colonial legacies in museums and collections, community partners and research, and other topics that address racism and colonialism. And also part of this seminar series, you can hear more about David Starr Jordan, which was a talk given by Kate Montana. And we'll have links on the YouTube page, but also links dropped in the chat. And I'm going to end with a project that's near and dear to me. It's called Untold Stories. This project was a way to amplify Academy voices that have been marginalized. The image on the right are some of the people we've highlighted so far. And this was a team effort that comprised of archive staff, graduate and undergraduate students, and high school interns from the Academy's Career and Science program who profiled some of these hidden figures. This is a project that continues to this day, and we've just started a new cohort of staff and students. So, and to find out more about this project and to read some of the profiles, you can go to our library page, which will drop the link in. And then, and there's also a great video that interviews all the participants. And so since I'm a librarian, I'm going to sort of end the talk with at least 2 book references. There's a lot of material out there about racism and colonialism in science, but these 2 books were fundamental in my research for this talk. Racism, Not Race, Answers to Frequently Asked Questions by Joseph Graves and Alan Goodman, that was published in 2021. And Superior, The Return of Race Science by Angela Saini, that was published in 2019. And if you don't want to read the whole book, you can also listen to her on the Code Switch podcast, on a podcast called Race Science, Making a Comeback. I want to thank you all for making the time to watch this presentation and to listen what I had to share. I've covered a lot of information, but we are really just scratching the surface here. This talk was a true team effort, and so many people helped make this content come together. I again want to thank my co-presenters from the original talk, Christine Garcia, Flavia Estevez, Kate Montana, and Lindsay Palama. I'd also like to thank the following people for their help: Raina Bell, Shannon Bennett, Chris Grinter, Jennifer Hoey, Natalie Nagalingam, Suzanne Pierre, Rebecca Wilcox, the Mosaic Collaborative, and all research staff. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Well, now we'll open up the floor for any questions and also any questions from our online audience.
How is it changing the way you raise money?
How is it changing the way?
Support in light of this, approach?
I don't know. I'm just I'm the librarian, and so development is kind of a little bit outside my. Oh yeah, but Deb, who's here, I don't know if she wants to take the mic. Who's from development? Maybe she can speak about that.
Well, thank you. I am not sure that I have the greatest answer to that question or an Academy sanctioned answer to that question. Speaking from the planned giving perspective, what I do know is that a gift to the Academy allows us to democratize science and make it accessible to other areas that may not have had access to science in the past. And that we have programs that bring youth from all over the Bay Area to the Academy for free. It supports, we have a lot of other activities that support people who may not have traditionally had access or viewed themselves as people who would want to come to the museum. We have many programs, an Academy for All program, to encourage them to come visit the Academy, and donations to the Academy help make those programs possible. Speaking from the planned giving perspective, the estate giving, which is where my specialty falls, that is a great democratization of giving, as it allows anyone with any level of means to pass their wealth on to the next generation and ensure that it reaches a broader population outside of just their family. So I can tell you that we think proactively about who makes up our board of trustees, which is the leadership that guides our strategic direction and our strategic plan, and are working to ensure that there is representation from many backgrounds, including people with a capacity to support the Academy, and then those who may be coming to us with a different ability, but a strong passion and interest in science as an Academy Fellow to be a part of that decision-making body. So I'm going to ask Jess or any of my other colleagues in the room if they have any other thoughts to that. And I will say thank you for that excellent question.
Actually, I was more thinking about how you go about choosing the kind of things you're going to study. What's the focus? Has it changed the focus at all?
Change the focus of what we're studying. I mean, I think we have some initiatives that are working on sort of raising money to help work with local communities. So like to address the issues of parachute science and have like true partnerships. And so that has been the like that. I mean, that just didn't start recently, but that is something that in research we've been working on, is trying to develop partnerships with local communities and have it be mutually beneficial. Yeah, sorry, Deb, yeah.
Well, one of the components to that. So an additional supporting component to that would be the change in the Academy's mission statement over the last couple of years. So the Academy's mission is to regenerate the natural world through science, learning, and collaboration. And we are taking that collaboration component very seriously. And as Rebekah said during her presentation, to ensure that we are being an equal partner with people who are in the areas where we're doing our research. There's a tremendous amount of information on this on our website. If you look, if you go to calacademy.org and search using the word values or vision, and it will come up with the list of our values, and it will demonstrate the archipelagos where we're working on our future initiatives and showcase some of the many organizations that we're collaborating with at a local level who are helping to drive our initiatives.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you for the presentation. I guess I have a question. I've been to a couple museums now recently, like in the last couple months, and similar themes are being kind of framed in the museum. And I guess personally, I really appreciate it, but I'm also wondering whether this is something that's kind of national. Is this a kind of a new trend in natural history museum, in museums in general? And if it is, can you kind of share a little bit about where you see it going?
I mean, I think I was talking with some people earlier. So these issues of colonial and racism are, you know, universal. So we're not, the Academy is not alone in this. And I do think there has been a conversation in the last few years about a more sort of honest telling of histories in exhibits or of our specimens or of materials. And so that is like, I mean, I don't know if it's a trend, but I think it's people are asking for a bit more honesty, like people who come to exhibits, but people even who work in museums would like to be more transparent about where did these things come from? How did we, you know, how did we get them? You know, and what story isn't being told? What other people have participated in collecting these materials that their story's been overlooked? And it does take an incredible amount of work to do that kind of research, but it is something that I also am seeing more of. And I think in the Academy itself, we are trying to do more of that sort of transparent, honest storytelling or telling of materials. But yeah, it is. And there are lots of, I mean, there are lots of discussions about things. I mean, in the museum world, the Smithsonian has a ethical returns policy that they just sort of started, and talking about a repatriation, not just based on legal standards, but an ethical and moral standard. And so there's a more sort of honest discussion within museums about what does it mean to be a museum and what does it mean to hold these things, and what should we do with some of the stuff that has these legacies, or what's the right path forward? I don't think anyone really knows, but I think we're all willing to have these discussions about honest discussions about what should it be like, or what, and who else should be in these conversations with us. Yeah. Any other questions?
Rebekah, let me try to play devil's advocate here. There's a lot of talk. It's good to have it in a vision statement, but how deep does it actually go beyond this, beyond the skin? How much time does the facility, the academy spend? How much budget is being spent on this particular effort? And followed up is you have about 80% of your collection that is not database. So how do you know what you have and what you potentially have to repatriate, for example?
Yeah, those are all really good questions. I'll just remind everyone, I'm just the librarian, so I don't run the world. But they are. I mean, I think the academy right now, we're just, we've finished a course of anti-racist trainings, and like we are just at the sort of start of reckoning with what should we do with this information that we have, this knowledge, and like what can we do to address some of these issues. The collections issues, that's a big one. I mean, I think even before we were talking about like colonial legacies, we have always talked about how behind we are. I mean, I think this is true of all museums, but it does feel particular, like we have such a large collection. It is hard to know what we have if it's not databased in any way. And I think talking about it in this way is helpful because it also makes us understand how skewed we are to like thinking that Western scientists can come and visit us. But what about people who come from places that are, it's much harder to travel here or don't have the funds? And we do have some programs that help research scientists from other places, but it's something we're hoping to broaden. And we do want to, I think we all in our collections want a database more for whatever reason, but like, it's just, yes, 46 million specimens and only 20% database is not great. And like looking through a ledger for something is not the most efficient use of our time. Yeah. So yes. Yeah. I mean, and I would say keep asking those hard questions, maybe to people who do have more power than me, agency, but yes. And I appreciate them. Thank you.
Hey, Rebecca, these are a couple of questions coming in from our virtual audience. So one question, would the Academy ever consider using some of the Ohlone language to reference the animal specimens that originated from the Bay Area?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's possible to have that kind of consideration. I just don't, I don't think we have had those conversations, but it's definitely a good idea. I mean, we do have this Indigenous Solidarity group, but they're really just about building partnerships right now or just reestablishing them. But yeah, that's good. And in collections, we've talked about enhancing collection data. So that's a good point. I mean, it's something to consider, and definitely. I think our biggest problem is bandwidth and staffing. Like we just don't have a lot of staff and obviously that's why we're so behind in the databasing, but we've talked about being able to include other people who've collected. So that would be another facet of collecting extra information or additional information. Thank you.
And then I have one more, which you may have, I think you already spoke to it a bit, but do you all partner with other scientific institutions on this issue, or is it just a CAS focus?
Yeah, we have had some, I think, informal conversations with various other institutions, but I think we're still like in the early stages of talking about things. And I do think we're probably going to start seeking maybe more official relationships or more sort of official collaborations with other institutions about these kinds of topics or activities. But yeah, right now it's really just, we're sort of academy focused only because we've just started this journey. Yeah, thank you.
And then one more. Do you have a relationship, and I think they mean the Academy, does the Academy have a relationship with the telescopes at the top of Mauna Kea?
No, I am not aware of the Academy having any relationship, but that's a little bit outside my scope of knowledge, but not that I am aware of, yeah. And not me personally either. Any other questions? And yeah, if you have questions later, you can feel free to email me. It's just rkim@calacademy.org. I'm happy to answer or try to answer any questions you may have.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Rebecca. That was wonderful. And thank you, members, for joining us today. Well, hopefully you'll join our next member talks on the coming Tuesdays in October. But thank you.
Thank you.